Another episode of Rethink Real Estate. And today, again, I like to do the interviews with some of the agents that I get to work with when it comes down to the auction process. And Adrienne Mineiro is one of our very best agents that we are involved with the auction process. And not only that, throughout the company that we have as well, and down in the San Diego marketplace. A very genuine story when it comes to real estate and getting into it. A single mum that didn't really have any options, got fired from a retail job and then got into it. And again, it sort of going through it with her, it sort of gave me a little bit of anxiety to think about that position and to be able to move through in a commission-only business, and then also through the way that she did it as well, through some of the cold prospecting avenues. Now, predominant part of the business is referral now, but Adrienne is a really a successful story within the space of real estate, successful story when it comes to a single mum that has grown up two kids that we've gotten to know through social media and that have done really well. So a great journey. Definitely worth listening to, because after she financially became secure, had to really understand, well, why am I going to keep doing real estate? And I think it's really good from a purpose perspective to listen all the way through. Thanks so much. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Adrienne, welcome to Rethink Real Estate.
Thanks, Ben. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, Adrienne, you and I have got to know each other over a great deal, many years, okay?
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel like it's funny, right? Because the one thing that I want to make sure is that from the very onset of this podcast is that we give people, hey, why are we listening here? Is that you're in very consistently in the top 20 every month within our business. And I get to make those phone calls within our real estate community and say, hey, congratulations for being number whatever it is in the top 20, because we make those acknowledgements. But for some reason, Adrienne, I get the feeling that you're one of the more humble real estate agents. I don't get the feeling, I know that for a fact. So I wanted to make sure we pointed that out from the very beginning, is that this year, you've had a great beginning of the year. The last few years have been exceptional as well. But the thing that I really love about your real estate journey, and I think that the community can get the most out of, is that you're the type of person that wears their heart on their sleeve very constantly about the ups and the downs that we go through in real estate. And I want to focus on that a little bit more today. But first of all, how did you get into the business?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I feel like real estate kind of picked me. I didn't really pick real estate. When I became a single mom, I really wasn't planning. I wasn't expecting. I don't know that anyone does plan to become a single mom. But I really didn't have a very strong career to fall back on, even though I went to college. Before I got married, I was working in a basically human resources recruiting function. But it had been years since I'd been in the workforce. So when I was having to go back to work, I was a bit resistant, to be quite honest. I actually had my own company. I was a jewelry designer, and really that was something that I really loved, and I was hoping to kind of continue with that in that capacity, as well as something that would help, just pay the bills, essentially. So I got into retail sales, worked my way up, became a store manager. And honestly, it was probably the worst job I could have chosen. As a single mom, you have hardly any control over your schedule, having to be tied to a store. And it was very, very difficult for me. But when I moved to San Diego, I continued down the retail path out of necessity, and actually found myself in a situation where I had to pivot for different reasons. But I had networked with a few people here, and actually met someone who connected me with an independent broker who needed some marketing help. So I started helping him, and he encouraged me to get my real estate license, which I was like, really? I can do that? You think I could sell real estate? Okay. Oh, sure, I'll do it. And that's how it happened.
Well, I suppose that it's funny though. Again, you've got to forgive the fact that there's a certain part of this that I've never thought about, because one of the requests that we had one of our guests on previously that was a single mum, and ultimately they they really resonated with the community that we have here. We have a great deal of our audience that is female listeners because, again, I've said this publicly many, many times before, and I've said this on the podcast. I do believe females are far better realtors than males, but just based on the nature of how they approach things is far different. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some that don't, and just like other situations. But the thing that I didn't think of, Adrienne, is that as a mum with young kids, you can't have a 9 to 5 job. It just doesn't work. And if you do, there's a great deal of support network that you need, or there's a great deal of expense that you need to pay in order to make sure that happens.
Yes.
So I think that I probably have taken for granted the flexibility within the real estate community that they has from a single mum perspective. But your kids now, and I've got to see them grow up on social media, okay, and very well accomplished, both of them, okay. And I guess that if somebody was listening to this podcast right now and they had younger kids and they were a single mom, what are the things that you've learned along the way with real estate and having young kids?
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about, if you are going to get into real estate, what to look for in the company that you end up working for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I in hindsight, I can kind of go back and dissect why it worked for me. I mentioned the independent broker that I worked for. Once I got my license, I had to start figuring it out. I had to start making money. I had to, it was all or nothing. And I realized I wasn't going to get from him what I needed to be successful in real estate. I was fortunate enough to get connected with Harcourts, and I realize now that a lot of my success is due in part that we are such a listing focused brokerage and company. And that to me is something that I think that's really, really important, to start with that foundation, because I think most people, when they get into real estate, they start working with buyers, right? They start cutting their teeth with buyers. That's just kind of the natural focus, which is great. And I don't diminish the importance of a buyer's agent. I definitely work with buyers as well. But I think starting with that foundation, that focus on the listing side of things, really positioned me to have success, because I built such a good foundation. I had such a good understanding of how to take a listing, how to prospect for listings, and was also really, really blessed to be connected with my former business partner, who's now not in real estate, but he took me under his wing and really showed me what to do and how to be a good, effective, and honest agent, which is something that's very important to me.
Reflecting on the real estate community, Adrienne, is that it's probably something that probably a lot of people think that they need to be a list, or they think that they don't want to get into real estate because ultimately they need to be listing orientated. But then a lot of people make a lot of money in real estate from individual transactions, certainly in Southern California anyway, you being based out of the San Diego area, pretty large average sale price on the coast, and think, I just need to sell 3 or 4 homes a year and I can make this amount of money. But from a buyer side perspective, is that the problem that we see with that is that people just getting the runaround for so long and not actually establishing a business that they have a little bit of an element of control over. And I've seen you do that, because if we were to just reflect on the first 6 months of this year alone, let alone just the auctions themselves, like I think we're up to our 4th auction for the first 6 months of the year together. And then also you've had a great deal of other listings that you've brought to marketplace as well. When you say that you really focused on that, how did you focus on that? Like was it just a mental set? Was it goal setting? Was it something you just thought I had to do?
Well, the office that I joined with Harcourts Prime, that was the focus. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. The first office I was with, they were like, okay, sit here and make your calls. I'm like, who am I calling? I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm doing. And I had to make that pivot. It was essential to me. I realized a different office had a much better structure for a new agent. to train them in, using the scripts to call expired and canceled listings. That's what I started doing because honestly, I didn't know many people here in San Diego. I've been here a year, maybe a year and a half. So there really wasn't a whole lot of relationship to draw from to build my business. So I was in the office as soon as I dropped my kids off at school. I was, in the office probably by 8 and was making phone calls. And, I was calling people to see if I could get in front of them to list their house.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how that direction occurred. I honestly had no idea what I was doing.
Do you know what, that level of naivety is sometimes so beautiful though? Because ultimately, I think that there's a combination of in the beginning of your business, you were naive to, okay, well, that's what I've got to do to make money, no problem. But then you had a necessity to make money. I think that there's the clinch in all of this. And that's where I want to kind of segue to, Adrienne. And this is probably a little bit more from an emotional perspective and some decision making that you had to make. 9 out of 10 people probably would have tried to find a steady paying job that they were miserable in,
Yes.
and that might have been a little bit flexible because of the kids and that they had to make money because of the kids and their situation. You going to a completely commission only situation, what was your thought process around that? Because I'd like to think that maybe we have some people that are listening that might be looking to make the plunge into real estate, trying to find that out a little bit further. How did you build that courage up to go, well, I'm going to go without a paycheck and actually give this a real shot?
I think, it was somewhat, like you said, naivety, but I've realized throughout my, just having been, in kind of a more stable, if you will, environment, it isn't always that stable. I'll back up a bit and I'll be very vulnerable to tell you that the reason why I had to pivot was I was fired from my job working in retail, which is, very humbling. But, I've realized that I in some ways have more control over my situation and my ability to make money, to do deals, rather than I did when I was working in a more traditionally stable environment. Even when I was working in human resources, and prior to that as an executive assistant, there's so many different factors that you really don't have control of in those types of careers. So I'm not going to fire myself. So I know if I do the work, if I, do the consistent prospecting, talking to people, making connections, talking to my past clients, I now know I'm going to be okay. I can, get some deals done and get some business in the pipeline. I've done it enough times to know that it's up to me. And if it's up to me, I can do it.
That's so refreshing in the sense that, again, obviously I'm the wrong person to sort of talk about this thing with, because I've only ever done real estate or known real estate, is that to know that to actually understand that you're not safe in a steady environment or steady job is is probably one of the things that most people probably definitely need to recognize. And it is one of those things that then, building on what you've done in real estate, that you've got the level of confidence that you can establish more business if you need it by doing the consistent things, and you are in more control of it than what you need. But I want to segue through to cold prospecting, right? I like, you went to Harcourts Prime and someone gave you a phone and they said, hey, this is what you've got to start saying, and cold prospecting I absolutely makes people's skin crawl. It's funny. A lot of people ask me to do prospecting training, and then I'll get into I have to warm the group up with how to build a referral-based business. Like, I have to warm the group up before they'll actually listen to me about maybe some cold stuff. But I know the environment that you were in, and it was pretty cold. Like, it was pretty cold to begin with, from an expired and everything nature. How did you continue motivating yourself? What was your experience when you first started? All of that. What were the emotional things that you went through in the first, say, 3 months?
Sure. Well, I feel like I was kind of set up to be okay on the phones. My first job out of college, I was actually a credit card collector for a big company, and I made collection calls all day.
That's cool.
And the sequence of getting promoted, you went from a higher level of delinquency. So you started talking to, more and more difficult people who really didn't want to talk to you. So I had some success. I found I was kind of natural on the phone. I was able to get people to do what I needed them to do. I was a big competitive with it as well. They tried to make it fun. We do some contests. Whoever can get this many people to give you their check details, so you can go ahead and pay off their balance. You get a prize, and I really liked that. That motivated me. So I think the fear of the phones wasn't so much a thing for me. I think for me, it was more just feeling like I had that legitimacy because I was so new into real estate. I didn't really, I hadn't taken a listing before. I hadn't done a transaction. So having scripts was very helpful. But sometimes I would veer off script. And I remember there was a situation where Kevin kind of, took me aside and, it was like, he recognized I was really trying hard. But he kind of had to coach me on, look, your goal here is to set an appointment. You're not trying to, talk to them about this or that. And I think that was the switch for me is, okay, I don't need to know everything. Even if a client asks me a question about, the roof or this and that, if I don't know it, it's okay to say, I don't know, but let me get back to you. I think having that confidence to, to just feel strong in what I was saying and not having to have all the answers.
Yeah.
That was a real point of change for me.
So there's obviously the answer to this might be because of, you in the beginning you needed to make money and you needed to make sure that you did so consistently. But how did you keep the motivation up? Because I know there's a great deal of people that we know and we see within our own organization that make a lot of calls and then they do really well and they fall off the face of the earth, and not to regain that momentum. You think, oh, maybe it's just a dead patch, but they don't regain that momentum. And maybe that, and that's maybe I'm answering my own questions here is that maybe that because I don't get the same self-entitlement from you that a lot of those people did have. But how did you keep motivated with doing it? Because again, it's not the nicest thing in the world to have to get up every morning and actually do that.
No, it's not. But I think it becomes a habit. It becomes a pattern. And honestly, I know a little bit of what we'll talk about is the mental struggle side of this. When I don't prospect, I tend to get more stressed because I know I'm not doing the things that I need to do to keep my business going. So I think a lot of it becomes, a bit habitual, and that's okay. And I prefer that. I like to do a task and, move on to something else. And I like to just focus on that one task. I can multitask like most women, but, I kind of thrive on a bit more kind of consistent behaviors. But, I think initially, obviously, I did have to make money. I was hungry, literally. I had to. So that was very motivating. But I think at some point, there's a shift in your mindset of, I have to do this to make money. But now it's more of, I want to do this so I can help people. And that was, really a powerful shift for me. I have reserves. I have money to live off of. Why do I want to keep doing this? And how can that motivate me? Really it sounds a bit contrite, but I really do genuinely want to help people.
Yeah.
And I know that I can.
And again, for those that don't have the opportunity to work alongside you as often as I do, is that it bleeds into all of the relationships and the conversations that we have. Like at the beginning of this year, like we've had to have some conversations with people that their homes are not worth as much as they are. And I have to be clear about this, is that a lot of my conversations are very combative because the listing agent doesn't have any type of relationship with that client whatsoever. Whereas you and I have, like, we've got people laughing their ass off about accepting $100,000 less than what they want because they know
Yeah.
you genuinely wanted to get them more, and hey, we're just bringing you
Yeah.
the marketplace and da 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 da. And we've had some of those situations. Don't get me wrong, we've knocked a few of them out of the park. We're like, holy shit, is that right?
Yes.
but
Yeah.
but the reality of those situations, the joy out of getting somebody an amazing result, and the joy, even I can say joy, of somebody just getting their home sold for a price maybe they're not over the moon about, but they understand and they discovered that with you. I think that's something that a lot of people misunderstand, is that the only time that, and again, I can say this because I'm passing the blame off Adrienne, but the only time that I have a combative conversation with the seller is when the agent hasn't done a good enough job to show them they care. And whether or not that's by effort or whether or not that's just genuinely just trying to listen to them, I think that that's something to be said in all of that.
Yes. Selling real estate, I mean, for us, it's our business, it's what we do, but for our clients, it's their life. It's such a human experience to sell someone's home or help them buy a home. It's oftentimes very emotional. It can be. And, people they want to be heard. They want to know that you understand their situation, that you're listening, that you have an understanding of what's important to them and their family, and have just a good ability to communicate. I think communication is so important, so easy to do. And that's something I learned from you from the outset. You talk about follow up with people, even if you don't feel like you have something to say. Like, even if you don't, have an offer on their home, call them every day, touch base with them, so that when you do have to have that difficult conversation, there's, like you said, that level of trust and that level of belief that you care, and that you've been just keeping them up to date. They just want to know what's going on. Even if there isn't really anything going on, tell them that. As opposed to just staying quiet, because that's when things get awkward, and they're starting to formulate their own opinions of you and what you're doing or not doing.
Yeah, this is such a solid point. There's this air of that it can turn very sour very quickly if they don't hear from you, regardless of what you're saying to them. Is that they need to hear from you. They need to know you're thinking of them. Indeed. Now let's run into, because I definitely want to get to this point, because I think that the cool thing, Adrienne, is that you've had a really successful start to the year. You've done really, really great. You've had a great deal of listings. You've had a phenomenal year. And just to be clear about this, is that you've done more in the first 6 months of the year than most people will do in 18 months, 2 years. But you and I were discussing the podcast, and you're like, well, look, I'm kind of going through a bit of a lull period. Can we talk about that and just be open about it and vulnerable? Because I think that a whole bunch of people would resonate with that. Is that at the moment, when you say a lull period, what do you mean? You don't have as much listings coming up, or you don't have a great deal in the pipeline? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, more the pipeline. Yep. I mean, I know I have business coming up most likely next year. But, it's kind of an awkward time. Not everybody wants to sell their home right now. Interest rates are still high. I did have a rush of business, and that kind of took my focus off of doing the day-to-day, the prospecting consistently, which if I could go back, I probably would make some changes. But, the great thing is I know what I need to do. I have that foundation. I'm much more confident, obviously, than when I started in real estate. And again, my mindset is so much stronger when I am doing those day-to-day activities of prospecting, having conversations, doing the kind of productive activities to get my real estate business going again. It can be, that can be daunting, and it is, but I think it's also exciting. It's kind of like a fresh start, if you will. So it's kind of how I'm trying to think of it. But this is all helping me because, I'm in it. I mean, I've got to get some listings and get some more opportunities to help some more people.
I like the idea that making that pivot into taking care of people, now that you've obviously gotten that financial gain out of real estate, is that it's putting you in much more secure position, that then transitioning over to, I love what you said before about, why am I staying in it?
Yeah.
Like that's one of the things is like, well, why do you stay in it? And that's the driving force in order to get there. But it's also, I see that in that period of lull, I guess that there's a level of optimism that you're having about, hey, this could ultimately start again. I've got, some business coming in the new year. I've got all of those different things. How do you take a break? How do you mentally take a break? How do you sort of take time off? How do you do those things?
It's a good question. Real estate can be hard to to get away from. I think again, having communicating with my clients if I am, going on vacation is important. Having that just expectation that I may not be quite as available. I think it's so important to get away. For myself, I can't truly relax unless I actually leave San Diego. I just can't. I get pulled in too many different directions. So, try to schedule it, make it a priority to take some time off. I live in a beautiful place, so there's so many things to do here that, it's important to have a life outside of real estate, have other interests. I know I talked to an agent once. I love football, so I love watching football. I love going to games, and and he said, "Well, real estate is my Super Bowl or something to that effect." And I just thought that was really sad. It's so consuming. It's such a consuming career that you could just do real estate all the time.
Yeah.
But I found it important to keep up my interests, try different things, whether it be paddleboarding or, taking up guitar lessons. I am thinking about, but just, to kind of be a more well-rounded person, because it can be potentially very draining as well.
So I guess that to round out the episode, I just wanted to sort of ask a couple of different things about, resources that you use. And what I mean by that is that do you like coaching or different type of people that you find, influence from in the sense of training or podcasts you listen to, and whether it's real estate, whether it's life, whether it's any of those things, do you have any resources or anything that you can think of that might be in your daily habit or weekly habit that you go to?
Yeah. Well, I was in coaching for a period of time, Mike Ferry coaching, which, I think it's very foundational. I'm not in it anymore. And, there's some reasons why. I think, again, it was a good foundation for me to build upon. However, I found it a bit necessary to pivot a bit and get, kind of approach things more from my personality style and not trying to emulate a, different type of personality. I think it's really benefited me. The work I did with Julia Gentry was crucial and kind of just really having a better understanding of who I am, my personality type. I'm a type 6 on the Enneagram, which, if you read it, it makes a lot of sense. But, she was really instrumental in helping me understand, look, you can help people, which is what you want to do. It's important to you, and sell real estate. You can do both. And when I made that shift and made that understanding, it really made all the difference for me.
Right.
So she's great. I definitely listen to podcasts. I listen to yours. I enjoy it.
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Now, quick question, because I asked Diana McGovern this. Are you going to listen to your own?
Oh gosh, that would be painful. I'm sure I will. It might get a little cringy for me, but yeah, I will. I'll listen to it.
Good.
I'll listen to it.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, Adrienne, to wrap up the episode, I just wanted to, from a personal perspective, is again, I've gotten to know your business. I've got to know you as an individual person. And I think that from a person that's being genuine and happens to be in real estate, I think that's the way that ultimately you could label yourself, is that you're a genuine person that happens to sell real estate. And that really, that resonates hopefully with the community. And, it's definitely something that I've grown to appreciate a lot more from the perspective of dealing with your clients versus dealing with some of the others that have a metallic relationship that's just based around me getting a commission check out of you and moving on.
Yeah.
And I can vastly tell the difference between the two. So congratulations on all your success. Thank you for joining us on Rethink Real Estate. And,
thank you.
and thanks for being a listener.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I will continue to listen, and I'll drum up the courage to listen to this one too.
Great. Thanks again. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.